Welcome back, Libromaniacs. So, today I am asking the question, did Jesus know about Darwinian theory? Now that sounds crazy, doesn't it? How would Jesus know about Darwinian theory, you might ask? Well, I'm not going to, the answer is not something along the lines of, well, he's God and God knows everything. That is not the answer. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of missing years in Jesus' life. We don't know what he was doing for the majority of his life. The Gospels only really talk about, the nativity, and then a time when he's like 12 years old and he is debating some of the rabbis, and then pretty much the rest of his life is missing. It's just unaccounted for. And there's been a lot of books about the missing years of Jesus. Was he in India? Was he in Egypt? What was he doing during this time? Was he wandering the world? So we don't know what he was doing for most of his life. So, but the point is, to my question, I can't give a positive or a negative based on what information we have about his life, but I can say that he could have known about Darwinian theory. Well, how is that possible, you're asking? Darwin was in the 1800s. Well, I'm going to grab this book off my shelf called The Forgotten Revolution by Lucio Russo. The subtitle of the book is How Science Was Born in 300 BC and Why It Had to Be Reborn. This is an amazing book. It's a little bit pricey. I think I only paid the last time I saw this book on Amazon, it had like doubled in price. I don't know why exactly it went up so much, but I got it before it doubled in price. And this book talks about, I'm big into Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria, how much knowledge we lost. Like Carl Sagan frequently said things along the lines of, we were set back 1,000 years by the loss of Alexandria. They had steam engines in Alexandria. They had temples with automatic doors. These temples had little places where you would light a sacrificial fire to the gods, and they had these hydraulic pipes, and when the pipes were heated, it would move a piston, and that would open the doors. So they literally had like automatic doors. They had vending machines, coin operated vending machines. You could put in, I think it's called the drachma, and it would dispense holy water for your for going into the temple. They had I said they had steam engines. They hadn't attached a piston to it, but they were in the descriptions and diagrams of Hero of Alexandria, this engineer. They basically were up to the level of steam technology, and this book doesn't even talk about this. I've got other books that talk about this, but they were working with electromagnetic energy. They had this levitating statue that it would on cue, as soon as the rays of the sun hit this, it was a quadriga. It was like this 4-horse drawn chariot of Helios, the sun god, and when the sun would hit it, it would levitate off the ground. And there's 2 Christian writers, Rufinus, I think Rufinus of Aquileia, and Quod Voltus, this really interesting looking name. Both these guys described this statue, and they said it was operated by magnets. But one of my books says, well, how did they control the flux? Like, how did they might have had electromagnetic energy. This is right around the same time that the Baghdad battery has been discovered. The Baghdad battery has no better explanation than it is an actual battery. It was probably used for electroplating jewelry and whatnot. So even there's an author out there who talks about how did they in Alexandria, how did they have enough fuel to keep the Pharos lighthouse burning, the light in the lighthouse burning all the time. And the guy brings forward this suggestion that, hey, they might have had dry cell batteries, like a series of them, and they were working with electric lights in the Pharos. So they knew about the heliocentric theory. Aristarchus was talking about it. So they knew that the sun was the center of the solar system. However, it was a minority theory. Aristarchus himself, even though he reports about it, he does not necessarily agree with it. But they were so advanced. The Renaissance was literally the rediscovery of all this knowledge from the Hellenistic period, and Alexandria was the premier center of knowledge during the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period is it goes from the Hellenistic period. I want to say it begins with the death of Alexander the Great in like 331 or 332 BC, and then it goes up until the deaths of Mark Antony and Cleopatra in 32 BC. So it's about a 300-year period. The Hellenistic period was just off the charts. They were assimilating knowledge from, it was like this huge melting pot. They had knowledge from, the Babylonians and the Persians and the Nubians and, all these different cultures. They knew about the Buddha. They knew, they had Indians bring, these, they called them gymnosophists, bringing their knowledge to Alexandria. And it was just any ship that came into the harbor, all of its books were seized. They were copied, and then the copies were returned. They kept the originals, and the copies were returned at a later date. So they amassed this huge library of information from all around the world, and it's estimated the library was usually people say about 500,000 scrolls to maybe 750,000. I'd go even more. I'd say it probably was up to 1,000,000 scrolls. But anyways, it was a whole lot of books, a whole lot of knowledge, and the core of the collection was based around Aristotle's library. Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle, and when he was like 16, it was for like 3 years or something like that. But when Ptolemy formed this library, he basically started with all the core collection of Aristotle, and it is in Aristotle where we find. I first realized this when I read this book, The Forgotten Revolution. I will read you this passage here. They're talking about, this is a section on botany and zoology, and they're talking about Theophrastus. He is a person who appears in Aristotle's works, and it says, of particular interest is Theophrastus's critique of the Aristotelian theory of final causes. Actually, on this subject, the most gripping passage is not in Theophrastus, but surprisingly enough in Aristotle himself. In Book 2 of the Physics, it examines with great clarity the possibility of replacing the teleological framework by a principle of natural selection. And this is from Physics, Book 2. But a difficulty comes up. What prevents nature from acting not with a purpose or for the best, but rather as Zeus makes rain, not in order that the grain may grow, but by necessity? For the rising vapor must be chilled, and by being chilled turn into water and come down. Likewise, nothing prevents the parts of living beings from behaving in the same way, so that the front teeth by necessity arise sharp and adapted to cutting, and molars flat and useful for crushing the food. All of this happens not on purpose, but by chance. And nothing prevents this from being so also for other parts that seem to have arisen for a certain purpose. And so in the case where everything happened by chance, but as if with a purpose, those beings survive because they were put together by chance in a suitable way. Those for whom that was not so have perished and do perish. That is the end of the passage. It then goes on to say, Aristotle then overcomes this difficulty by noting that the features mentioned, the shapes of incisors and molars, etc., occur regularly and not sporadically as they would if mere chance caused them. The denial of the existence of true final causes and the lucid explanation of the correspondence between sculpture and function of animal organs based on natural selection are very far from Aristotelian thinking, and in a matter that is central to it. Thus, this passage may reflect a substantial divergence of opinion between Aristotle and someone who had raised the difficulty. The passage was well known to modern scientists, and its influence has probably been underestimated by historians of science. Now, that's pretty fascinating that we just read a passage from Aristotle, and it's basically describing natural selection. Now, Aristotle went on to refute it, but interestingly enough, if you go to On the Origin of Species by Darwin, now originally he had a preface in there, and before the book they had a preface where he literally cites Aristotle as the source of this idea of natural selection. In my copy of Origin of Species, it's been moved to the appendix on page 385. I think they're trying to downplay, just like they said, just like Lucio Russo said, that passage is well known to historians of science, and they have greatly downplayed it. But here is what Darwin himself says originally in the beginning of his book. This is an historical sketch of the progress of opinion on the origin of species. I will here give a brief sketch of the progress of opinion on the origin of species. Until recently, the great majority of naturalists believed that species were immutable productions and had been separately created. This view has been ably maintained by many authors. Some few naturalists, on the other hand, have believed that species undergo modification and that the existing forms of life are the descendants by true generation of pre-existing forms. Passing over allusions to the subject in the classical writers, and he has a little star there, the first author who in modern times has treated it in a scientific spirit was Buffon. But as his opinion fluctuated greatly at different periods, and as he does not enter on the causes or means of the transformation of species, I need not here enter on the details. That little star goes down to a note to Aristotle, Physics, Book 2. And he actually has a different translation of that passage I just read you about, why do parts of the body have to be made this way when they could be made as Zeus makes rain, that whole thing. Now, also in the Forgotten Revolution, there's a passage, or there's a section on determinism, chance, and whatnot. And in one section it talks about, he paraphrases Cicero here. He says, Cicero says that anyone who thinks that the ordered universe we know might have arisen accidentally through the causal concourse of material particles should allow that, by shuffling and scattering on the ground a bag of letters of the alphabet, one might get Ennius's Annals ready for reading. That is a paraphrase of Cicero, but essentially they're saying, if you just shuffled letters around, eventually you're going to come up with some other author's work. And he's downplaying that. He's saying that's impossible. And we say that all the time. We say, if you give 400 monkeys typewriters and give them an eternity to type, eventually they'll produce Shakespeare's work. They're saying, no, that doesn't happen. And I tend to agree with that. Like, we say that all the time. You hear people say that, if you just give it enough time, they'll come up with Shakespeare's works. But the thing is lotteries get to the point where you can actually, there's certain Powerball lotteries that get so big, the jackpot is so big, you can literally buy every combination of ticket. And they do that, and then all you have to do is make sure nobody else wins, and then you win. But the thing is they don't buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They don't buy 2, 4, 6, 8. They don't buy anything that's a pattern, because that has never happened in any lottery. Anyways, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Lee Romaniac.